Welcome back to XRP on Moon, the place where we break down the most explosive XRP news, market reactions, and the moments that could potentially shape the future of crypto. If you are holding XRP, watching XRP, or even just curious about where this digital asset is heading next, then what you are about to hear in this video is going to demand your full attention from start to finish. Because right now, a headline is circulating across the crypto space that has completely shaken sentiment once again, claiming that the SEC chair has dropped what many are calling a NUKE on XRP holders. The phrase alone is enough to trigger fear, excitement, confusion, and speculation all at the same time. But what does it actually mean, and why is the entire crypto community suddenly reacting like this could be a major turning point for XRP? To understand the intensity behind this situation, we need to step back and look at the ongoing tension that has always surrounded XRP and the SEC. For years, XRP has been one of the most controversial assets in the crypto market, not because of its technology, but because of its legal battle and regulatory uncertainty. Every statement from the SEC, every rumor from insiders, and every market interpretation has historically been enough to move XRP's price and sentiment dramatically. Now, according to the latest wave of discussion spreading across crypto media and social platforms, there are claims being made that new comments or implications from the SEC chair could once again influence XRP's regulatory future. While nothing should be taken at face value until officially confirmed, the market rarely waits for confirmation. It reacts instantly to anticipation, speculation, and fear of missing out. What makes this situation even more intense is the timing. The crypto market is already in a highly sensitive phase where investors are watching regulation, ETF developments, institutional adoption, and liquidity shifts more closely than ever before. In such an environment, even a single phrase from a high-level regulator can act like a spark in dry grass, igniting massive volatility across assets like XRP. And this is exactly why the phrase SEC chair dropped a nuke is gaining so much attention. It doesn't necessarily mean a confirmed destructive event. Instead, it reflects the emotional reaction of the market. Traders interpret uncertainty as danger, and danger creates urgency. Urgency creates movement, and movement is exactly what we are seeing right now across XRP discussions worldwide. But here is where things get even more interesting. While fear-driven narratives spread quickly, there is also a growing group of analysts and XRP supporters who believe that any new regulatory clarity, even if strict, could actually become a long-term catalyst for XRP's adoption. The idea is simple. Markets hate uncertainty more than they hate rules, and XRP has been living under uncertainty for a very long time. So the question now is not just what was said, but what the market thinks was said. Because in crypto, perception often moves faster than reality. And right now, perception is everything. As we move deeper into this breakdown, we are going to explore what is actually being claimed, how the market is reacting behind the scenes, and whether this so-called nuke moment is truly a threat to XRP, or potentially the beginning of a new phase that investors are not fully prepared for yet. If you are still watching, then you already understand that the situation surrounding XRP is not just another typical market rumor cycle. It is something that keeps repeating in different forms, each time creating a new wave of fear and speculation. Now in this part, we go deeper into what is actually fueling this latest SEC chair dropped a nuke narrative, and why it has spread so quickly across the crypto community. At the core of this entire reaction is not a single confirmed announcement, but rather a combination of interpretations, indirect statements, and recycled regulatory tension that has always surrounded XRP. In crypto, especially with high-profile assets like XRP, the line between official communication and community interpretation often becomes blurred. A small comment can be expanded, reshaped, and amplified into something far bigger than its original context. This is exactly what appears to be happening here. The SEC chair, as a figure, represents regulatory authority over the U.S. financial and crypto environment. So naturally, any mention, hint, or even general statement about crypto regulation gets immediately analyzed under a microscope. XRP, due to its long-standing legal history with the SEC, becomes the first asset people connect to any regulatory discussion. What's important to understand is that the phrase dropped a nuke is not coming from an official source. It is coming from market reaction culture. In crypto, language becomes emotional. Traders, influencers, and commentators often use extreme wording to describe uncertainty or potential impact. This creates a ripple effect where fear spreads faster than facts, and narratives start forming before confirmation even arrives. Right now, the speculation revolves around whether recent regulatory commentary could signal a shift in how digital assets like XRP are classified or treated in the future. Even the slightest possibility of policy adjustment is enough to trigger massive discussion because XRP has historically been directly impacted by regulatory clarity or lack of it. At the same time, we cannot ignore how the market behaves during these moments. When uncertainty increases, liquidity often becomes unstable. Short-term traders react quickly, algorithms adjust risk exposure, and sentiment indicators start to shift. This is why XRP sometimes experiences sudden spikes or dips even without any clear fundamental change. It is driven by expectation rather than execution. But there is another layer to this situation that many overlook. While fear-based interpretations dominate the short-term narrative, long-term investors often see these moments differently. For them, any renewed attention from regulators is not necessarily negative. It is a step closer to resolution. And resolution, in the world of XRP, is something the market has been waiting on for years. So now we are left with two competing narratives. One side believes that any aggressive regulatory tone could create pressure on XRP in the short term. The other side believes that increased regulatory focus could ultimately clear uncertainty and open the door for broader institutional adoption. And this tension between fear and optimism is exactly what is driving volatility right now. It is not just about what was said, it is about what people think it means for the future of XRP. Now that we understand how the narrative started and why the SEC chair dropped a nuke phrase is circulating, the next critical question is, how is the market actually reacting to all of this in real time? Because in crypto, what people say online and what the market does are often two very different realities. When uncertainty like this enters the XRP ecosystem, the first place it shows up is not in official announcements, it shows up in trader behavior. You start to see shifts in sentiment across charts, sudden spikes in volume, and rapid positioning changes from short-term participants. Some traders immediately move into defensive strategies, reducing exposure or tightening stop losses, while others try to capitalize on volatility by entering quick speculative trades. This reaction pattern is not new for XRP. In fact, XRP has gone through countless cycles where sentiment news, whether confirmed or unconfirmed, has triggered sharp emotional responses in the market. The reason is simple. XRP is not just another crypto asset in the eyes of traders. It is one of the most psychologically reactive assets because of its long-running legal and regulatory storyline. Right now, what we are seeing is a classic uncertainty-driven trading environment. There is no clear structural breakdown in XRP's fundamentals, yet sentiment is shifting rapidly based on interpretation of regulatory signals. This creates a situation where price action can temporarily disconnect from actual developments and instead follow emotion, speculation, and momentum. In these kinds of conditions, algorithms and high-frequency trading systems also begin to play a major role. They scan for volatility spikes, changes in social sentiment, and sudden liquidity movements. Once detected, they adjust positioning automatically, which can amplify small moves into larger swings. This is why XRP can sometimes appear to react too strongly to news that is not even confirmed yet. However, it is important to separate short-term reaction from long-term structure. While traders may be reacting aggressively right now, the broader XRP ecosystem, including institutions, developers, and long-term holders, tends to focus more on clarity, adoption, and utility. And in that context, regulatory discussions, even intense ones, are part of a longer process that ultimately shapes how XRP integrates into global financial systems. Another key point is that volatility itself attracts attention. The more people talk about XRP during moments like this, the more liquidity and participation it tends to attract. This creates a feedback loop. Speculation increases attention. Attention increases trading activity, and trading activity increases volatility. That cycle is currently active again. But here is where things become even more interesting. Despite all the noise, XRP has not shown any confirmed structural breakdown in its broader positioning. Instead, it continues to trade within its larger macro behavior patterns, which suggests that what we are witnessing is more of a sentiment shock than a fundamental shift. So the real question becomes, is this nuke narrative actually changing XRP's direction, or is it simply another emotional wave in a long history of regulatory-driven cycles? As the conversation around XRP continues to intensify, one of the most important perspectives to bring in is what analysts and experienced market observers are actually saying beneath all the noise. Because while social media tends to amplify emotion, professional analysis usually focuses on structure, probability, and long-term implications rather than dramatic wording like SEC chair dropped a nuke. At this stage, many analysts are treating the current situation as another cycle of regulatory sentiment pressure rather than a new fundamental shock. The reasoning behind this view is straightforward. XRP has already been through years of high-stakes legal scrutiny, court developments, and regulatory commentary. Compared to those historical events, most new statements or interpretations tend to fall into the category of continuation rather than transformation. From a technical and macro perspective, observers are paying closer attention to whether XRP's broader market structure is actually changing. Price volatility alone does not necessarily indicate a trend reversal or long-term shift. Instead, analysts look for sustained changes in liquidity flow, institutional positioning, and confirmation through volume-backed movement over time. So far, the consensus in many circles is that XRP is still operating within its larger cyclical behavior, meaning reactions are occurring, but without a confirmed structural breakdown. Another key point raised by market watchers is that regulatory attention, even when framed negatively, is not always a long-term disadvantage. In fact, some of the most bullish long-term arguments for XRP are built on the idea that regulatory clarity, even if strict, can unlock institutional participation. Large financial entities typically avoid assets that exist in legal ambiguity. Once clarity is established, whether restrictive or supportive, it often reduces uncertainty risk and opens doors for integration into payment systems and financial infrastructure. This is why a portion of analysts interpret moments like this not as damage events, but as part of a slow progression toward definition. The crypto market, especially assets like XRP that have been under regulatory spotlight for years, often experiences this tension between short-term fear and long-term structure building. At the same time, more cautious voices in the market are reminding traders that timing still matters. Even if the long-term outcome is positive, short-term volatility can be unpredictable and aggressive. Liquidity shifts can trigger stop-loss cascades, sentiment can flip rapidly, and over-leveraged positions can be wiped out in a matter of hours. So while the narrative may not represent a fundamental crisis, it can still create very real trading risks in the short run. Interestingly, what makes this situation stand out is not the severity of the claim itself, but the speed at which it spreads. The XRP community is one of the most active in crypto, and that level of engagement means that any regulatory mention tied to XRP gets amplified globally within minutes. This amplification effect is part of what keeps XRP consistently in the spotlight, even during periods where no major official updates are occurring. So the overall analyst view can be summarized into a balanced interpretation. This is not a confirmed NUKE event, but rather another high-intensity sentiment cycle driven by regulatory association, historical context, and market psychology. And that brings us to the final and most important question. What does all of this actually mean for XRP holders going forward, and how should this kind of situation be interpreted in a broader investment mindset? It is time to bring everything together and understand what this entire SEC chair dropped a nuke on XRP holders narrative actually means in a broader, more realistic perspective. Because when all the noise settles, what truly matters is not the headline itself, but the impact it has on long-term thinking, investor behavior, and XRP's overall trajectory in the market. First, and most importantly, XRP holders need to recognize a key reality of the crypto space. Narratives move faster than facts. In moments like this, the market is often reacting to interpretation, not confirmation. That means emotions can temporarily outweigh fundamentals, creating sharp waves of fear or excitement that do not always reflect the underlying asset's actual position. In XRP's case, this is not new. Over the years, XRP has repeatedly gone through cycles where regulatory discussions, court-related speculation, or SEC-related headlines have created strong short-term reactions. Yet despite all of these cycles, XRP has continued to remain one of the most recognized digital assets in the global payment and liquidity conversation. This alone shows that volatility in sentiment does not necessarily equal a collapse in relevance. From a long-term perspective, the biggest factor that still surrounds XRP is clarity. Markets dislike uncertainty more than they dislike strict rules. Uncertainty keeps institutions away, slows adoption decisions, and creates hesitation in large-scale financial integration. So even when regulatory discussions feel intense or negative in the short term, they often contribute to the gradual process of defining where assets like XRP actually stand within the financial system. This is why many long-term observers argue that moments like these should not be viewed purely as threats, but as part of a longer evolution. Whether the outcome is favorable or restrictive, the removal of ambiguity tends to be the key turning point for assets that have spent years in legal and regulatory gray zones. Once clarity arrives, market participation often becomes more structured, more predictable, and more institutionally driven. However, it is also important to stay grounded in risk awareness. No matter how strong a narrative sounds, crypto markets remain highly volatile and sensitive to sentiment shifts. Sharp movements can still occur in both directions, and overexposure during emotionally charged moments can lead to poor decision-making. That is why disciplined risk management remains essential, especially when headlines are dominating market psychology. At the same time, XRP continues to sit in a unique position within the broader crypto ecosystem. Its focus on cross-border payments, liquidity solutions, and institutional partnerships gives it a use case narrative that extends beyond speculation. This means that while price action may react strongly to news cycles, the long-term discussion around XRP is still tied to real-world financial infrastructure development. So, when we step back and evaluate the situation objectively, the so-called SEC chair NUKE narrative is less about an actual destructive event and more about a recurring theme in XRP's journey: the constant clash between regulatory uncertainty and long-term adoption potential. It is this tension that keeps XRP at the center of attention, even when no official breakthrough or breakdown has occurred. And that brings us to the final takeaway. For XRP holders and observers, the real challenge is not reacting to every headline, but understanding the difference between emotional market noise and structural market change. Those who can separate the two are far better positioned to navigate both volatility and opportunity. This video is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice. Cryptocurrency markets are highly volatile and risky. Always do your own research and consult with a licensed financial advisor before making any investment decisions.